Okay, I think we have people already joining, and we're going to talk today about the role of plain language in health literacy. I know that Michael was talking about the fact that readability is not everything, and actually the role of plain language is exactly in that direction, that readability is not everything. The fact that a document can be labeled readable doesn't mean that it is comprehensible. So we're going to look at what we can do about that. These, let's see, where I'm not in the right place, right here. This is a little bit about me. I've worked in and services. I'm part of the team pushing through and working on the plain language standard through ISO. And I'm one of the instructors in the Plain Language Academies. So I'm really passionate about fostering clear communication. I'm also a member of Plain, and I just want to give a shout out to all plain language practitioners. Today is International Plain Language Day. So we'll also have some activities through Plain about that. Today, we're going to talk about plain language, why plain language is needed, how it fits in health literacy, and how you can put it to practice. So first and foremost, what is plain language? If you look at these two fragments of text that are from two different real documents, we see that the approach to information is very different. Just by reading the first few words, the disclosure obligations of your proxy representative, to a health literacy proxy is a document that names someone that you trust. Just that gives you an idea of the different ways we have to approach communicating about the same topic. So plain language is an approach to communication that helps readers find, understand, and use information through wording, structure, and style. And to me, this is a little modification of a graphic from Plain Language Australia that really says plain language helps you understand at first sight. The way it works is through interventions in three different aspects of the writing process: the writing itself, the drafting, the wording, the structure of the document, and the design of the documents. So we're going to go into the text to make it understandable. We are going to format it to make it understandable, and we are going to add support to make it understandable. Another definition I like to share comes from Lerner, who was the editor of the Black's Law Dictionary for many years. Plain language is the grammatical and idiomatic use of language that most effectively will present ideas to your reader. So that helps us understand that there's a range of possibilities, that plain language is not a single approach, that is not a one size fits all. And this is a very important concept. We can adapt our presentation of information to really meet the needs of our audience. So what happens in plain language? We really want to go from a wall of text that the reader finds and feels trapped in to an open text that they can access, and that they can access at different points and in different ways. And this definition comes from an agreement between the plain language associations that have formed the International Plain Language Federation. So to me, I like to break it down into 5 aspects or 5 principles that I call RAISE for relevance, accessibility, intelligibility, suitability, and efficacy. And we're going to look at what these entail. So why do we need plain language? What is this clarity in communication doing for us? One huge aspect is that skills are slipping, and we see literacy and numeracy dropping in many surveys from the OECD to the North American adult surveys for competencies. So we really need clarity. A couple of examples: the public, 1 in 4 American adults does not understand what the orbit around the sun means. 50% of our bills, of our legal projects in Congress include scientific and technical components that the ultimate users of that law and the developers do not understand. Applications that are not being, that are not fostering communication and clarity for collaboration. I see on the chat that there was someone looking for the slides. I have uploaded them, but apparently that didn't work very well, but Diana is helping me getting them through. So you're going to have them. So what else is happening with literacy in general that needs clarity, that where plain language fits in? We have a variety of situations, a variety of interlocutors in our health communications, and that's also where plain language fits in, particularly through empathy, through understanding the needs of our audience and adapting to that. Plain language in general, zooming out, fits our multitasking lifestyle. So clarity in communication is needed not just in health, but in many other aspects. And it has a long history. And these are just some highlights that include the creation of the plain language associations, the fostering of plain language as not using gobbledygook, which was a phrase that was made famous during the World War II years. And we have moments in history where different figures have fostered clarity in communication, like going way back into the use of Latin to quintillion. So we really have a long history of adapting to our audiences. In health literacy, as you know, we have a new definition that includes the organizational fostering of understanding, and we can see that plain language fits in this idea of helping readers and users find, understand, and use information and services. So this is my visualization of all these concepts and where plain language fits in. We can certainly in health literacy have interventions at the level of education of individuals, institutional interventions that include the legal framework of our actions, but also, for instance, signage in a hospital that can help people go to the right place. Interventions for professionals. You probably all know about the literacy toolshed, about the class standards, but we're going to talk about particularly what happens when we use language. And one of the IQ scores are dropping in the population. We still have a disconnect between the level, the distribution of intelligence and our ability to use that intelligence for understanding. So we can help bridge that gap and increase the number, which in this case is the blue, this middle blue, increase the number of people that can understand better through clarity. Of course, plain language benefits business, and there's many examples that we can talk about in another session about how it saves time and makes money and boosts credibility, supports compliance with regulations, such as, for instance, the lay summaries regulation in Europe and what's coming up for us in the US. And plain language is also good for experts. we, as I said at the beginning, we can, we really need to embrace versions, and we can have a clear, plain language approach to a technical communication, as well as a clear, plain language approach to an easy read communication, and of course, a lay reader communication. So how do we practice this? In relevance, in accessibility, oh, excuse me, we're gonna go here for a minute. In accessibility, in the wording, in the suitability, in the efficacy of our communication. There's two concepts that come from the writing world and the linguistics world, which are textuality and adequacy. And simply, they really mean making a text really a text, and not just a bunch of different sentences that you throw together and that may be easy to read, but they're hard to understand. I'm going to take a real quick look at the chat. Okay, perfect. Let's see a question. So how do we start with relevance? Let's take a look at these two pieces of text. They both start with a very similar title. What are polyps? What are colon polyps? But in the first case, we have a detour, a colonoscope. And so the colonoscope wasn't mentioned in that title. So we need to really align what we say we're going to talk about and we will really talk about in the text. And of course, weed out any information that is dear to us, but may not be dear to our reader. In terms of accessibility, there's an organizational aspect of it, the rhetorical aspect of it, and there's a design aspect. So in the narrative structure, for instance, we have the typical structure, an introduction, a problem and a resolution, and we don't want to mix that up, as entertaining as that may be, because it really creates questions for the reader. And so where it may very well fit in a literary text, in a novel, in a poem, in a short story, it doesn't really fit in informational material. But occasionally you can use it. Occasionally you can use it. So you need to be aware of those different possibilities. And then once you choose your structure, you want to format it and add design for it. So what are the different structures that we can have in addition to the storytelling one? We can have sequence of events, we can have cause and event, we can have hierarchies. So how do we move from a document, for instance, this document where it's difficult to access and you don't need to read it, it's even in Spanish. But we can go from that to a document that clearly states a sequence of events that have to happen for the reader so that we're guiding through that process. In terms of adding design, we can apply plain language principles to design. So we can get rid of, for instance, the background noise of the skeletons, the skulls in the background, or the 3D of this pie chart. To clarify what we're talking about the structure of the bone, and it's a very good analogy to use the Eiffel Tower, that is an iconic architectural piece, to say this is why the bone can be so strong, or to look at percentages. Of course, we want to look at including digital accessibility for online materials, and there's many different pieces of advice that we can follow. One thing that I'm very passionate about is that icons and emojis, we can get used to them, but by themselves, they can create a lot of issues. So anchor them with text. Always use them to help readers, but anchor them with text so that the interpretation really goes where it needs to go. In terms of intelligibility, the writing interventions, how we word things. In this example, guilt and bitterness can be destructive to you and your children. You must get rid of them. We understand that the counselor was trying to say, get rid of these feelings. However, that's not what comes through grammatically. And sometimes we really want to make sure that the grammatical interpretation is the one that we are leading our reader towards. So how can we fix this? We can make sure that we're talking about, you must get rid of these feelings. So sometimes expanding your references and taking up a little bit more space really helps. Another thing that happens is there's a lot of quick pieces of advice about plain language, and it's hard to sometimes capture the essence of clear writing if we're just using a readability formula, for instance. So all of these things, writing as if you were speaking, relying on readability formulas, banning the passive voice, we need to take them with a grain of salt. Imagine if the song from Elvis said something or someone has shaken me all up, it wouldn't have the same impact. So sometimes the passive voice helps us shine light on the object. So it's not that we're objectivizing, but it's that we're shining light on the something that is having an receiving the effect. I'm all shook up, right? So how beyond these little snippets of advice? When translating jargon, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the needs of our reader. In this case, we have 3 technical terms: intravenous, intramuscular, subcutaneous, and we can translate them like this. However, what happens if in the next communication we have intradermal? We have a little conflict between subcutaneous and intradermal. So we can become a little more specific and then redefine one of our terms in a slightly more specific way. So again, when we have, for instance, a glossary that says, okay, this technical term corresponds to maybe this lay explanation of it, we need to be careful that it may not apply in all situations. We really want to help the reader walk through without obstacles in your text. So we advise the patients to force fluids through his interpreter. There's a problem there. So the patient didn't force through the fluids to the interpreter, but the interpreter talked to the patient. So how can we fix this? Simply by displacing the phrase through his interpreter, we advise the patient. Again, the same complication here. It's rare that we're going to see a car riding a bicycle, but just to make sure, we can add a little word of clarification while riding a bicycle. The same thing happens with when we use numbers. And we had a question about numerals. I know a lot of style guides talk about spelling out numbers. I really like writing numbers in numerals. And if we want to follow a style guide that says, write them down, okay, let's do both. And it's even better. In this case, we need to separate dosage from acronyms and expand the acronyms. This is a real case that happened in Canada, and the patient was okay in the end, but these can lead to very dangerous situations. Very common mistakes in grammar that can lead to these situations, just simply using the wrong word, not having an agreement between the subject and the verb that can lead to confusion, the comma, parallel structure. We're going to see a couple of examples. So for example, when we pile nouns and we get this very, very long noun structure in English, it's very confusing. And it can be very confusing in a very simple text. And this is a communication I got from my cable provider. Your buried cable technician. The technician is not buried. What's buried is the cable. So we want to unpack that for our reader. Parallel structure helps process things much more smoothly. So instead of saying scaffolding is breaking up the learning, excuse me, we can use the same structure, breaking up the learning and providing a tool. Recasting to avoid ambiguity. This is one of the examples I was talking about. Few are the teachers who at the age of 5 can teach children how to read. Well, certainly few are the teachers who are 5. So we want to really say, connect the pieces that refer to each other. So how can we do that? We can redistribute the phrase. Few are the teachers who can teach children to read at the age of 5, or we can paraphrase. So there's different techniques to clarify this ambiguity. Garden paths happen when your reader goes in one direction, but your text wanting to go in a different direction. So if you read these, your eyes are going to put together her students, and it's her students, and it doesn't need a comma. But what it needs is structure. So a little word like that, the new data convince her that students, clarifies the whole thing very quickly. I want to take a look. Okay, units of measure. This relates to the numerals question. Somebody's asking, do you recommend spelling them out? It depends on your readership, if they're used to them or not. If you're not sure, it's always a good idea to clarify them at least the very first time you use them. So it takes a little more space, but if you make sure that your milligrams are going to be understood as milligrams, not as something else. And this idea that writing and drafting, you want to go beyond the terms of substitutions that are going to maybe give you a higher readability score, but are not going to get you much further in the understanding from the reader. So in these two texts, we have one that has more technical register, neurovascular, paroxysmal, dysfunction, and we have one that has more lay terms, blood vessels, sudden disabling instead of incapacitating, etc. Right? So what's wrong with this picture? That we haven't really unpacked the concepts other than used the lay translations. So how can we unpack them? We can create the formatting, and we can create guidance for the different things is wanting to do for the, which is a term that can perfectly fit here, that can limit your ability to work and cause pounding pain, includes symptoms like, and we add a picture that creates, that picks up all of these elements that can help the reader. So we're going in and really massaging all that content to bring out all these different layers of meaning. So to me, I see this as a clockwork possibility of work. We start with a very technical, kind of very dense text. We can go up in clarity for the technical, audience, for the experts. Migraine is a neurovascular disorder characterized by paroxysmal attacks. That's perfectly fine for the medical community. But then instead of going directly to the lay version down here through an obscure approach, we can go into the lay version with this idea that, okay, from this clear technical version, we can go to a clear lay version by unpacking these different elements. The next aspect is infusing empathy in your writing, and that has to do with the style. Somebody was asking about the style guides. Yes, following style guides and following the textual conventions that readers are used to seeing in a magazine versus a newspaper versus an online publication, that is important because it can throw us off to see something that's completely unusual. But it also has to do with infusing empathy in the choice of words, in the choice of structures, because it's really, it creates a gut reaction. And there's many now studies that show that empathy really starts with the way that we process information from a very physical point of view. So what can we do to infuse empathy? The guidelines from the APA, for instance, for using bias-free language really tell us that we need to be relevant, and we need to be relevant in ways that are also connecting with the existing body of knowledge. For instance, in this case, in this example, a researcher was trying to be empathetic by not using the word normal in a very statistical sense. And so they came up with a new word, the conventional and the unconventional, and this is very confusing. We also want to be specific. For instance, minimum wage is low. What does that mean? Low here, low in South America, low in South Africa, that situation. And we need to acknowledge that we all belong to different categories at the same time. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing the relevant categories for the communication. One possibility for this is using metaphor, and a lot of times we associate metaphor and analogy with literary work. And so I said at the beginning, literary work has its own world, but in reality, and many studies also show that we really construct our understanding of the world through metaphors. So it's okay to think about metaphors that can help our readership. For instance, this is an example where I used pin cushion, a magnetic pin cushion, to explain how an MRI works and the fact that it aligns some molecules that are kind of like pins. It helps you see them, and it has to do with the hemoglobin having being picked up by the MRI machine, but basically that it aligns in a way that it helps you see that, but then the pins don't, they don't go out of your body. They don't, nothing is disturbed, nothing is changed. We're just taking a peek through this technology. And lastly, before, let's see, yes, I think I have a little bit more time, is the efficacy of the communication. There's different ways of testing communication, and I really like to think, when we write, think about what we can do in spoken communication. And one technique that I like, I call it the PARCA technique, because it really covers the whole aspect of communication. When you're a writer, you think about what can come up, and sometimes we can ask readers, what can come up? We present the information. How can we answer questions that the reader may have? How can we restate that information in a non-redundant way, but in ways that can help the reader see it from a different perspective? And check for understanding. Sometimes the use of multimedia can help you us do that, to ensure that we are getting the whole message through. The last few items, really, in the world of medical communication, lay summaries are now becoming a requirement. And for instance, we can see that 90% of people poll about the pharmaceutical industry have a negative image. A lot of people, 77%, have said that they haven't, once they participated in the and volunteers say that they don't really want to participate again for the most part. So we can solve this with clarity in a whole variety of communication opportunities with the patient. Just in the clinical trial life cycle, we can have many points of intervention with clear communication. Just in a recent Health Literacy podcast, Something I really liked from Dr. Kramer is this idea of helping the patient with preparation before a consultation. So sending materials so they can come and have more informed conversations with their providers. I think that's a great place to start. So these are your resources that we talked about today. Plain language, definitely your subject matter expertise, guidelines that come from the plain language world, and empathy in communication through bias-free language. The interventions can help you go from a wall of text to text that has meat in its wording, guidance in its structure, and support in its design. So with this, I thank you all, and we can go to some questions and answers. Let's see, we're gonna go, oh, I see the chat. Relevant categories, excellent point, thank you. Do you know about any ability tools to field test a document on the phone? Unfortunately, the testing of documents, the quick ones are just readability formulas, which to me are basically a temperature check, and you do not do a diagnosis based on just whether your patient has a fever or not. The same thing is for your text. Okay, if the readability says the reading level is not what you expected, that is one indication, but it really doesn't give you much to go on. So there are some additional tools being developed. The SAM instrument, for instance, takes some time to really apply. So it's hard to do a quick check. And I think that the best way to do a succinct check is to really have, you read it, you have your reaction, give it to a colleague, give it to a potential reader, and really take that input and that feedback into account. Let's see, more questions. I know there's questions in the chat and in the Q&A, so give me a second to go through between the two. I missed the portion of the race principles. Oh, let me show you that slide again. I'm gonna go real quick to, sorry for the scrolling, but so that you can see that. Let's see, where did I have that? Right here. Oops. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I went too fast. Sorry. There. The relevance is working with your context, accessibility is working with your structure and the design of that structure, intelligibility is the wording itself, which is something that we, sometimes we see a document and it looks great, but then when we dive into the way it was worded, it really has a lot of problems. The suitability is including in that wording, and I bring it out because once you have a readable document, for instance, for a technical audience, you can really adjust that, the style, the adequacy or suitability to a different audience, and then the efficacy with trying to check in different ways. And sometimes it's really letting the document rest and coming back to it, because we have all of these understanding in our head that it's like, oh, this is perfectly clear. But then we come back the next day and it's like, oh, where did that come from? So sometimes that very simple technique can help us address issues. How can we apply plain language in oral communication? Oh, yes, we can apply plain language in oral communication. There's the difference between oral and written communication is that in oral communication, we can make changes on the fly. So that's why writing as if you were speaking doesn't make sense, because we're always clarifying. We're always saying, oh, I forgot this. Or, you know, you need to do A, B, C, D. Oh, no, wait, A, B, C, D, E. So we can add a step in a less confusing way in oral communication than in writing communication. In writing communication, you don't want to say, do 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, wait, I forgot these other points. So between 1 and 2, do this. You just go and edit that, right? So practicing the order of things is great, but also practicing unpacking information. So when if you're, I think actually an example from Dr. Kramer in that podcast the other day was that he was talking to a highly educated person and about renal issues, and they were going through diagnosis, and at the end of the conversation, this very educated person said, but what's renal? So unpacking all these, unpacking concepts, making sure that we are communicating orally, but also are giving written support to take home is important. I see more questions coming up. Let's see here. So convey risks associated with procedures. This is a very delicate topic. And Mario, please tell me if I'm running against time. I'm in Pacific time, so I think we have 5 more minutes. Is that correct?
Actually, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes. Oh, okay. So communicating about risks. We want to be clear about the risks, but at the same time, the risks can seem, when we say, you know, there's a 90% chance, you want to walk people through what that 90% looks like. So sometimes you say, well, you have 10 patients, you know, 9 are going to have this outcome, but 1 can have this other outcome. That grounds it into more tangible information, for example. Let's see. The slides are going to be available, and my, let me pull up my email here. So if you have any questions or anything that we haven't covered, you can email me. Let's see, where did I leave that here? I'm sorry, I can't jump to it. I'm toggling between 2 screens and I lost track of it. Let's see. These are extra things that I can show you at another time. But right here, almost there, right there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I'm happy to share answers, to share resources. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being interested in plain language. Happy International Plain Language Day, and thank you for your work.